Hi, I'm going to try this. I wanted to, it feels weird just sitting there and talking to the computer, so I wanted to talk to the computer while I'm doing something else. And I'm making stew tonight. It's going to cook overnight in the slow cooker here. And so I thought that I would talk to the computer while I'm making the stew. Normally I'd be listening to / watching something, so this is, I'm not quite sure how to start, because I feel like I'd be talking as I'm working, but I'll figure it out. So, but I'm not going, it's not an instructional video on how to make stew. I'm going to be making the stew, but I'm going to be talking clearly, hopefully, about books and things that I have been experiencing. This happened to coincide with the 17th, which is when I usually, which is to say the last couple of months, like to do the halfway through the month video. So there's that. Serendipity as well. I suppose in the last video I held up as the first book of 2020, that Ice Palace by Edna Ferber. And for anyone who doesn't know, Edna Ferber wrote the novel Showboat, which became the quote-unquote first Broadway musical. So that was my interest in that book. Also, I love, as I may have mentioned, I love ice things to do with ice and cold in the winter. And it was very, very good. Not sure that I caught everything. It was a book that was challenging read, not the easiest thing. It's literary, and so I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna read it again. I do love Alaska. I've never been, but I love the idea of Alaska. So I plan to read it again, but it was interesting. It dealt with Alaska's statehood, Alaska's personality as a state, who counts as Alaskan, it had a character that kind of encompassed all of these things: a young woman growing up, grandfathers on either side of the debate over what Alaska should be. Edna Ferber is, she wrote books that became musicals and movies. She's not the most well-known. She should probably be more well-known. But it was a while ago that I finished that. See, this is the, can I talk to the computer, be heard by the computer, not cut my finger off? That is the question that I'm going to find the answer to, because a lot of these things need to be cut up. So because I don't have that much to say about about Ice Palace, other than it convinced me to keep it. It was a big hardcover book, takes up a lot of space, needed to convince me to keep it, and it did, because I want to read it again. And I don't think it's going to be easy to find at library sales, although I did find it at least once at a library sale. Pardon me for a moment. So the second book video that I ever made as a person who talks to YouTube was because I wanted to acknowledge my January books that year, because I was excited by them, because I had decided that the theme of January, I've started assigning themes to more months than just October and December, and the theme of January, since it's the month that I was born in, are books that I already know I'm going to like, books that aren't a risk. Ice Palace was intended to be read at the end of 2019, not the beginning of 2020, but it fit because it's Alaska. And the second book that I read, which I just finished today and wrote about, was Leslie Fiedler's Freaks. And I had never read it. It's a very academic book, but I knew that I would like it because I have a long-standing fascination with the historical circus sideshows and the performers who populated them in their stories. They're very interesting stories, and as expected, a lot of them were featured in the Leslie Fiedler book, like Priscilla the Monkey Girl and Emmett the alligator-skinned boy man who met and fell in love and went into business exhibiting themselves as the world's strangest married couple. And I found out in further researching them, because they actually weren't mentioned in the book, they're just one of my favorite examples, and I would like to write a musical about them. I found out that they and so many other sideshow performers would winter in this one particular Florida town. So, I don't remember. It begins with a G. It's something like Galveston or something. It's not an actual town. I think it's an incorporated township or something. But I will link to it, to the Atlas Obscura entry in the below to be fair to it, because I got its name wrong. I'm in no position right now to look it up, so I'll make sure that the information is there. And my fascination with these people stems from the play The Elephant Man opening on Broadway, a revival, just as I was getting into Broadway. And it didn't even have any... Now I know who Billy Crudup is and I'm a fan, but at the time I didn't really know who he was. But he played the Elephant Man. But the point is, there weren't any stars that I would recognize, and so it pulled my attention just by its very nature and the story that it told, and it directed me toward the Mel Brooks produced Anthony Hopkins John Hurt movie about the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, and an incredible story. A worse experience than, perhaps somewhat typical. Most of the sideshow performers that you hear about were the most successful ones, and thereby not as tragic. Joseph Merrick, had a very hard time in his performing life and was rescued by Frederick Treves, I think was the doctor's name. And Frederick Treves, he got something out of it too. He got to study and treat a very interesting patient. But it was good for Merrick to be off the stage. I just got a text, and it was an instruction. I'm supposed to turn it to low and not high, because it cooks overnight for 8 or 9 hours. I think that would be it for potatoes for the time being. Let's see. There's a lobster boy. I forget his exact name. Grady, I think, was his first name, and I forget his exact story, but it was a very violent story. I believe it involved the mob, possibly, and it definitely involved murder. It was a whole family of people whose arms and legs didn't develop properly, and they were exhibited as, I think I said lobster people. There were entire families. There were the Doll family, and Chang and Aang, the original Siamese twins, theirs wasn't a family of sideshow types. Theirs was, they just got successful
and then they each married. They were conjoined twins. They married two different women, and the families occupied two houses nearby, and they would spend a couple of days at this house, a couple of days at that house, and they made it work. And that's why these stories are interesting, because these days conjoined twins would be divided. Even, the reason that Ben Carson is famous is he divided twins joined at the head, and I think he was the first to do that. But back then, if they divided, the procedures that would have divided them probably would have killed them, and so they made it work. And they weren't completely happy. One of them, I believe, was an alcoholic. These are the kinds of stories that were in that book, and that book was also interesting because Leslie Fiedler is a literary critic type, and he's looking not only here at history but at literature and mythology, and how these people throughout human history influenced those stories and those myths. Like, people were born who were 6 feet and up, and they became giants. They became Goliath and those types. And people were born likewise very, very small. They became hobbits in The Lord of the Rings. And people were born with conditions that made them resemble in some way, shape, or form this or that animal. The alligator-skinned man had very rough, dry skin. There were also, I think the reptile man or the reptile boy was a different person. Priscilla the monkey girl had hair all over her face. She was Priscilla the monkey girl, but there was also Jojo the dog boy. I think it was the same or similar condition. In any case, it presented the same way, but they were called by different animal names. And, these days, things like that are treated. For the most part, you still hear about them sometimes. But, those, and again, for the most part, maybe somewhere they are not at either of the Coney Island shows that I went to. But maybe somewhere in the world they still exhibit themselves. When I wanted to write about sideshow folk in 10th grade for a term paper, and the debate within the paper was, is it right to exhibit them? And probably a lot of whoever's watching this is thinking, no, it's not right to exhibit them, it's not fair. And that was my first thought. But then I read about Otis Jordan the Frog Boy, and his opinion of, but he wants to do it. It's the only life he's known. It's how he makes money. What else is he supposed to do? He can't exactly move easily. And again, these days we have ways of making life easier for people who were born and their bodies grow differently. But back then, he didn't have that. I don't remember the exact, but I think the quotes that I was reading were from the 80s. But essentially his thing was, this is my career path. This works for me. I should be allowed to, because somebody had protested his exhibit, and, nobody asked him, but they got him, they wouldn't let him perform. And it was not, that wasn't, it was on his behalf. He wasn't complaining about working conditions. It was somebody else thought that he was being treated unfairly, and it didn't matter to people that he liked his life the way that it was. So it's an interesting debate, and like I mentioned, there is still the Coney Island circus sideshow, freak show performance. Most of the people there are learned freaks. They learn to hammer a nail up their nose, or light themselves on fire, or use the electric chair to run a current through themselves or an audience member. But there's a little person who I've seen there twice. The first time, I think it was his first, they presented him as a newcomer, and he did a trick. He was a little person, but he also had a talent to show off. And a couple years later, I went back, and he was the host of the whole show. Do you think that's enough? Let's see, where was I? So yeah, he was the host, and there was also, I don't remember exactly what his affliction was, but there was a guy who he was in a wheelchair. His growth was stunted in some way by some condition. He was from Philadelphia, he said, and he played guitar and answered questions about his condition. So that smells good. There are people who continue to display themselves as freaks. The last performance that I went to, finished up, person said, "Stay freaky." I was going somewhere with the people who look like animals thing. People who have the medical conditions that make them look like animals. And the place that I was going with that was superheroes. Spider-Man is a human, but he's got an affliction where he can do a lot of things, but from his wrists, webbing comes. And Aquaman talks to fish. And, at least the new version, the Jason Momoa version, has got the tattoos that make him look like he has scales. Tattoos, also commonly seen in the freak show. So, essentially, what I'm getting at is these people used to be mythologized as literal half-human, half beasts. And today we have half-human, half-beasts in our literature, in our popular culture, but they're superheroes. So the same ideas, but different packaging. Three of these. One moment. It was a really interesting book. He brought up how, certain people were displayed because of how they challenged or just didn't conform to what society said that the sexes were supposed to be. A woman with a beard, a man, mostly it was women with beards, and they were strange, and they were something to look at and think, at least for women, at least I don't have a beard. Same with little people or with fat people or with human skeletons, just looking at them thinking, I feel strange, but at least I'm not that. And but he made the link to, he was writing in the mid to late 70s, the book was published in 78, and he made the link to androgyny, and how, particularly rock stars at the time, he uses Mick Jagger, but David Bowie comes to mind, rock stars would dress androgynous, so that it was not immediately apparent, is this person a man or a woman? And I'm slowing down because I'm using the knife again. I believe on 2 separate occasions I have cut myself significantly with this knife while cutting carrots, so I'm being careful. It brought to mind currently the non-binary awakening, people declaring themselves non-binary because they don't fit all the way, they don't feel like they fit the definition of man or the definition of woman. And it's the same sort of instinct, or seems to be. And androgyny is presentation, non-binary is on the inside, but still it feels like it comes from the same place of, if I'm neither, I don't have to compare myself with the others of that variety. If I'm not a man or a woman, I don't have to compare myself to other men or women. I am not comparable, I am something else. That's not me saying that for me, that's my interpretation of what I've heard from and about non-binary people. But that whole idea of going to the freak show, at least I'm not a woman with a beard, that not wanting to be comparable, or not feeling like you are comparable. He doesn't say it more eloquently because he's not saying what I'm saying, but you should read the book because it was ahead of its time in many ways, even as it mostly looked backwards at both at historical freak shows and also at ties to mythology. Let's see if I can think of anything while I'm cutting this carrot that I have left to say about that book. I don't know, but there will be a link to my write-up about the book down below the video. It is hard to be eloquent while cutting vegetables. I don't know how the TV chefs do it. I mentioned, I think, November 1st, the video from November 1st. I talked about the movie freeze, which Leslie Fiedler talks about extensively. And I'll just mention it again as something that makes a very interesting watch. I'm almost done with carrots, but I'm also going to cut other things. But next I'll snap the beans so that I can not worry about the knife. But people cut vegetables on YouTube, so I'm sure that it's at least a little bit interesting, even though I'm not talking. Maybe some people are watching because they're wondering, will I cut my finger off? I've never cut my finger off, I've merely cut it open. I suppose that would qualify me to perform in a freak show, if I cut it off. Although, it's people who are born with more fingers, not with less fingers, who are the most interesting in the freak show. The beans. Let's see. I'm supposed to snap 1/3 of these beans. I'll use the knife just this once on the beans to open them. The floor is on a slant. It was Ethel Merman's birthday yesterday. Forgetting the exact date, I celebrated it a little early, thinking that I had missed it by watching the movie version of Call Me Madam. Call Me Madam is the musical, the only musical for which Merman won a competitive Tony. I think she also got a Lifetime Achievement Tony or something like that. But competitive Tony is she was up against other people, and it's also the only. Well, she made a couple of movies based on musicals. She made the Anything Goes movie, but that was apparently. I haven't seen it, but from what I read in biographies of her, it was not to her liking and didn't really show her off, which is kind of hard to believe, but there was a time when showing off Ethel Merman was not the top priority of the people who were working with Ethel Merman. And I suppose my great uncle would count among that number because the way he apparently talked to her when she was working on the musical that he wrote, it did not seem like his priority was that she do what she does. It was that he had his song sung the way he wanted it to be sung. Inspiring her apparently to say, the dentist is never to talk to me again, or something like that. But Call Me Madam, it's an okay movie. It's a typical kind of bawdy Golden Age type musical. Couple of Merman age lovers, couple of young lovers, princesses. Written, I think, the script written by the same people who wrote Happy Hunting with my great uncle and with Matt Doobie. I decided to keep the DVD. Not that I was ever not going to keep the DVD. There are only so many. It's my rule of threes, and I don't know what other Merman movies I might one day choose to own. I do have the Ford Center special or whatever that is, which she did with Mary Martin. And so I guess that's two, because I won't count the Ed Sullivan DVD that has her just at the very beginning. It is Michael Crawford's birthday on Sunday. And to observe that, I plan to watch, which I haven't watched in its entirety in a long time, although I watch clips from it all the time, his concert video. I don't think it has a name other than Michael Crawford in Concert, and there might be more than one that he did, but it's got the all-white picture from On Eagle's Wings, the Christian album, and he sings 3 of the songs from On Eagle's Wings. And looking forward to that. I have a VHS player, which I have had now for 13 or 14 years. I got it halfway through college. Someone is yelling somewhere. And I like to use it every so often, but I don't want to have too many VHSs here. I think what I've got is that Michael Crawford one, and I have Robin Williams live on Broadway, which is what I've watched most on VHS. I have the 2004 Tonys, which to this day is one of, if not my very favorite Tony ceremony that I ever saw on TV. And I think I have might have the 2012 Tonys, or that might be the 1940s movie version of The Woman in White that I'm thinking of. I don't have many VHSs, and I don't plan to acquire more like I do with the DVDs. I have less faith that used VHSs will be in good shape even than I have that used DVDs will be in good shape, and I don't have much faith that used DVDs will be in good shape. But I have that Michael Crawford one, and I'm going to give it a watch. I like to keep the VHS player. I like to exercise it every so often. You should exercise your machines. This probably hasn't been used since at least March, possibly since for longer, because we only use it to make the hot stuff in the wintertime. And this is the first stew of the wintertime. But if this, video turns out good, then I might talk to the computer every time I make stew, rather than putting on a movie or the news or a podcast. But I am running out of things to talk about. Well, not really, but things that I have interesting, worthy things to say. How long has it been? It says 10:49 up there. I don't know when it's been about a half hour. I used to be with the parsley, which you saw me just chop up and dump in. I used to be a little bit more weird about that. I used to pluck every leaf off of every stem and not use the stems. I would throw away all the stems. You saw me put everything in there. I don't know why I started doing it that way. I don't think I ever officially really learned it that way, but nevertheless, I did it that way. Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday is coming up. What are you going to get her? I hoped to have a musical ready. That is not going to happen. Even if I finally found a collaborator, it wouldn't be ready by the 15th of February. So what I'm trying to do is contacted the Susan B. Anthony House. I'm going to try to get permission to put some of their official publicity photos on the Atlas Obscura entry that I wrote about the house, so that it's not just boring pictures that I took of the house itself, which is a very nice house, red brick, all that, but there's stuff inside that you're not allowed to take pictures inside, and though I have been inside the house alone several times, I have not broken that code, nor would I want to, as a former docent at the house. But that means that I rely on them to actually get back to me about the pictures. So I will email on Monday if I don't. Well, I'm not going to hear back from them over the weekend, in all likelihood. So I'll email on Monday if I don't hear, before I email on Monday if I don't hear from them, and get that ball rolling. A cup of peas. I think the peas have defrosted sufficiently by now. 1 cup of peas. This is spinach, not peas. It all looks the same frozen. Now this looks like it's probably not much more than a cup. So I think I'll just put it all in. You can never have too many peas. Though a little bit of spinach might have been too much spinach. I don't think I've ever put spinach in this food. That will defrost. A little bit of garlic. The steamed heat squeaks, which is frustrating because so do mice. And I built this wall here to keep the mice coming up out of the oven and getting onto the counter where the food goes. I don't mind them on the oven because food doesn't go directly on the oven. It goes in the things that get hot on the oven. But I mind them on the counter. I'll share my space with mice, but not the kitchen counter. What do you think? 2 cloves, bulbs, whatever these are. Garlic is very good for keeping you healthy, from keeping you from getting a cold specifically. I have heard, although I haven't done it because it doesn't sound appealing to me, that put garlic in orange juice and it keeps you very healthy. To me, that doesn't seem worth it. My roommate really dices garlic into very tiny little pieces. I don't. But since I don't, I feel a little inferior in my cutting of garlic. But that doesn't inspire me to become better at cutting garlic. I just stick with feeling inferior because it's not the biggest deal in the world. Let me think if I can think of any more birthdays. I started reading a biography, not a memoir or an autobiography, but a biography of Frederick Douglass. I'm also going to read one of his memoirs, but I started reading a biography. And one of his first, perhaps his very first master was named Aaron. I did not like that. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me think about my privilege. So it was a good, healthy experience to have. But I don't like seeing my name used like that. Which, it wasn't exactly used. It was the guy's name. And he was, he owned people, so he was not a good guy. And not a very happy guy, but I don't suppose that he would be, because he owned people. That's my slow read currently. I'll hold it up at the end of the month when I do that video at that time, because my hands are too busy to hold up books at the moment. It's a very, very large book. I don't think I've already mentioned it. I did 3 carrots, I'll do 3 celery stalks. I may have mentioned it because it was a very, very good used book find. There are bookstores, and then there are used bookstores, and then there are libraries.
Here are the questions from people. Kara, do you agree with Joe Biden that Mark Zuckerberg is a...
If you heard that, it's because I had my, I had thought that I'd be done cooking by now and that I might be watching the overtime part of real time, and so I had the YouTube video open for that and forgot. And so it started playing while I was still recording, and you may have heard, and you may not be hearing this because the sink is on, but I won't repeat it. What was I saying before Bill Maher interrupted? There are bookstores, and then there are used bookstores, and then there are library sales, and by now I think it's clear how much I love the library sales, but then there are the people who sell books off of tables on sidewalks. At least in New York City they do. Probably in other cities too. and is at one of those tables a few months after I first discovered the book at the bookstore Oblong, I think, in Rhinebeck, that I found an advanced reader copy, so paperback and uncorrected proof of the book sent to people for blurbs and stuff like that. And it was $5, which is way more than paperbacks like that would be at a library sale. But it was the only way that I was going to get a paperback of that book before probably next year, because when I was at Oblong just a couple weeks ago, they still just had the hardcover. It's called Prophet of Freedom, and of the Holy Trinity of upstate New York 19th century activists, the most important, well-known historical ones, Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You can fight me on them being the most important. He's the one I know the least about, because I gave tours of Susan's house, and I wrote a musical mostly about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, also about Susan B. Anthony, and Frederick Douglass is in it. But he's the one I know the least about, even though he's the first one I was really introduced to, because like everyone, I read the tiny little narrative. He had 3 memoirs, and one of them was the really little one that we all read in middle school or even maybe elementary school. Narrative of slave's life, something like that. I think the one that I have, the memoir of his that I have, is The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. The frozen peas. I want to make sure they're evenly distributed. So here's the interesting part of this stew, because usually, I think, the traditional way to make stew is with beef, and this still isn't a cooking instructional video. And my roommate likes to use chicken, but we were at the store getting the ingredients, and I saw her looking at the pork chops, and I said, "Do you want to try making stew with pork chops?" And she said yes, and so that's what we're doing. And by we, I mean she bought the food, and I'm preparing it. I've never cut pork before, raw pork. It is easier than beef or chicken, a little bit. Yeah. But it's also slippery, so I might not talk very much during this portion. I wanted to make the stew with because I have actually considered this in the past, and the pork thing was a brand new idea yesterday. I wanted to make it with a little bit of chicken and a little bit of beef. And I don't think she likes that idea, because we're not doing it. But it's something new-ish. Well, new. Not newish, just new. Can you see the much detail? I would also, if they ever make the right the right form of impossible meat, I would like to make Of course, they make the impossible meat to imitate beef and potentially also chicken. So I suppose there's no just generic impossible meat to make stew with at some point, since, again, impossible meat is meant to imitate real meat that actually exists. So it would be like making stew with beef, but it wouldn't be real beef. I guess I'd still like to try making stew with impossible meat at some point. This is the last, well, I gotta open up that other can of diced tomatoes and juice and pour it on top. But other than that, this is the last ingredient, so this is the last segment of the video. I hope it's been enjoyable. That maybe I've inspired you to watch a few musicals or read a few books. Hard to find books, but still, if you can find them, definitely worth a read. Currently, I just started Jurassic Park, the book. I will watch the movie immediately following finishing the book. Jurassic Park, I may have mentioned, both book and movie of Jurassic Park are my favorite adaptations of Frankenstein. There's just not really a great, completely satisfying movie version of Frankenstein or theater version of Frankenstein that I've seen. I may have just not seen the good one, although supposedly the best one is that one where the recent one from the National Theater or wherever that got broadcast on or was put on movie screens with Benedict Cumberbatch and I want to say Tom Hiddleston, but maybe not. But Jurassic Park, I think, is brilliant, and I think the movie and the book are of equal quality. They are different from each other in many ways, and very different, but I think they complement each other. Sometimes there are books and book-movie combinations that are just perfect clones of each other. Sometimes there are book-movie combinations where if you like one, you definitely don't like the other. And sometimes there are book-movie combinations, well, sometimes there's ones where you just accept that they're different, but sometimes there are ones where they complement each other. I think that Jurassic Park is one of those book-movie combinations, and Harriet the Spy, which I also recently rewatched the movie. It's one of my favorite, if not my very favorite children's movie. And Jurassic Park. Definitely great. And I'll hold it up and show it next time when my hands are not full of meat and vegetables. My copy of Jurassic Park is from back around the time when the movie came out, which was shortly after the book first came out. And, just a second. I used a leaf for bookmark, and I was a little kid, so the leaf didn't make it very many pages in, but it was still there when I read it halfway through college, and it's still there now. So that leaf is like 25 years old, and I'm still using it as the bookmark for Jurassic Park, and I will show it to you because it's in quite good condition. It's very frail. It could break at any second, so I'm going to be delicate with it. But, we'll see how much longer this leaf lasts. I got a few books that have leaves in them. My copy of Barack Obama's first memoir has a leaf that I caught falling while I watched Obama's victory speech after the
the night of the 2012 election when he defeated Mitt Romney. And that was almost 10 years ago, which is not 25 like the other leaf, but still, we'll see how that leaf has aged. I think that looks good. So now, cover, turn it on low. I feel like there should be a light, but there doesn't seem to be any place where there would be a light. So that's going, that's cooking. I'm going to clean up, but I'm not going to include that. So I'm at 50 minutes, which is short of an hour. I'm trying to keep it under an hour. So that was interesting for me. I hope to have more opportunities to do it in the future, or maybe I'll just deliberately, although if I cook, I can't hold up the books. Or maybe there's a way for me to. Anyway, I hope that my voice carried, even when I was off screen or the sync was running. And as usual, I hope you found it interesting, and as usual, ram the blade ship.